fact can we engineer serendipity? And whereas a lot of people like to talk about creative destruction as creating economic value, we like to talk about creative reassembly, which is, it's easy to destroy companies. You can take a company through bankruptcy fairly quickly. Compared to building a company. Building that same company is so much harder than destroying the same company. And the creation of that company comes from reassembling human beings, right? If you think of human beings as paints on a canvas, how do you paint that canvas? How do you organize the right people for the right tasks at the right time? And that ability to assemble people quickly is the heart of Silicon Valley. It's the lowering the barriers, lowering the walls to allow people to organize themselves as they need to solve problems. Now, the question some people ask is, why did this happen in America? Why did this happen in Silicon Valley? And the movement of the frontier, as people traveled from east to west in the United States, required people to do things that had never been done before, which is they had no families anymore. They only had strangers to rely on. And they had to learn to trust each other fast or they died. And this was very serious because west of the frontier, into the frontier, there was no one else to rely on. There were no gas stations, there were no hotels. You had to survive on with your strangers. People would meet up in the middle of the country, and in the span of a few days, they would form teams of up to 150 people with complete strangers for mutual survival. And they were the equivalent of startup companies. And you see this mode of culture that developed in the United States, which is the ability to form practical teams with people that weren't family members, not from your jati, that allowed you to survive. And this is really the heart of the assembly process of how people organize themselves. If you look in places like the Valley, we find several rules at work. There's an implicit social contract in these places. When we visited Gandhiji's ashram, we saw that he had his own rules, right? It was a set of founding principles of the ashram. And he'd written them out. But in most places, in most communities, these types of rules are not written. And what we've done is we tried to specify what these rules are. What is the constitution of Silicon Valley and places like that? And you find simple rules. Rule number 1: break rules and dream. That is, you're not limited by what happened before. You're allowed to find new ways of doing things. Rule number 2: open doors and listen. So be open-minded to meeting very diverse people and hearing what they have to say, because they probably have ideas that you've never heard before. In fact, social scientists have looked at this problem, and they found that when communities of similarly minded people get together, they tend to be less productive, even if they're very, very smart and even if they're experts, than groups of random people. Groups of random people tend to be more productive if they can get along together. Rule number 3, trust and be trusted. That is, you're not going to get trusted first. You have to extend trust before you'll receive it back from others.
It starts with trust.
It starts with trust. And if you start with trust, it creates more trust. And this is very similar to Gandhiji's thinking, which is if you lower your sword first, then other people will reciprocate as well. Rule number 4, experiment and iterate together. This is the notion that you're not going to know the answer. All you can do is experiment and try it out. And rule number 5, seek fairness, not advantage. That is, you're not seeking zero-sum games. You're not going to win. Right. And if you win, that person won't want to do business with you tomorrow, because everyone knows when they've lost. And so, if your goal is to seek up relationships that can be sustainable over time, the goal then is to try to seek fairness in your relationships with others.
That's right.
Rule number 6, err, fail, and persist, which is the idea that making mistakes is fine, and failing is fine, because it's how you handle it and what you learn from it that allow you to go forward and to keep trying. And then rule 7 is to pay it forward, which is an American saying. I don't know if it's popular out here, which is that you contribute back into the community, right? Whatever benefits you get, you give back to others, even if it's indirect, even if it's to someone new. And you find this a lot in Silicon Valley, which is you can get help from almost anybody, especially other entrepreneurs. They're always willing to help out people because they've been there before and other people help them out. So when you look at how human beings change behavior, this is what psychologists have developed as a model for cognitive behavioral therapy, which is people change behavior based on real-world activity. So they learn by doing things, they learn by assessing what they've done, and they learn by watching and being conscious of their own response, and then adjusting their response based on what others have taught them or what they've seen from others. And so when we look at trying to build these communities in places like Gujarat, we can look at certain basic tools. One, you learn by doing. You don't just learn it on the blackboard, right? It's not abstract, it's in practice. You enhance diversity. more power comes from diverse communities. You celebrate role models and peer interaction. You look at people that you admire, and you look at how they behave, you look at how they treat others, and you model that. And this is very important for communities to find the right role models and to identify them and to celebrate them, because we'll all learn from others. That's part of the human instinct. Tool number 4, to build tribes of trust, so to build communities. You find this a lot within university settings, where even things like student organizations become these groups based on trust and collaboration. The question is, how do you create these types of groups beyond small college communities? How do you create these across social networks that don't normally get to interact? Number 5, create social feedback loops. That is, you create networks where if someone does something wrong, people know. If you violate trust, you should know. It's very tempting for people to break a rule when they think they can get away with it. And so the trick is how you create networks where people can't get away with breaking rules. And number 6, to make social contracts explicit, just like Gandhi ji did at his ashram. How do you decide, how do you say, these are the rules of the system, these are the rules of the community, and we've agreed that these are the ways we operate. So what does this all mean? So if you look at the ways that people have tried to build places like Silicon Valley, it's a whole different method. Instead of factors of production, we actually look at things like cultural transformation. Instead of building clusters or technology parks or incubators, we look at human connectivity, not just physical proximity. Instead of building things local before you go global, you look at the whole world. The whole world is your playground. You go wherever the value chain goes. Instead of just writing small checks to invest into startup companies, what matters is not just the amount of money, but the human qualities of the people who invest matter. How they treat the entrepreneurs matter. Instead of just hiring people based on their skills, the character matters, their personalities matter, their values matter. Instead of just planning for specific outcomes, you don't know the outcome. All you can do is experiment and adapt and change. And instead of measuring just the output, you measure the environment. How much do people trust each other in this environment? How do diverse people interact? So in conclusion, what rainforests do is they thrive by nurturing what makes us uniquely human. And this includes the whole range of human emotions, including joy, sadness, and love. And you see this a lot in places like Silicon Valley, which is people do things for all these various reasons. It's really about two people and how they interact. Two people sitting in a coffee shop in Silicon Valley could be the start of a great big company. Google started with two people deciding to pair up together. But it's that type of transaction, that human equation, is multiplied millions of times throughout a system. And those two people have the ability to affect the entire system, and the ability of everyone to feel like they're an integral piece of a whole community is really key to the success of these systems. So I really do appreciate the chance to talk, and we can talk about these ideas further. And we use this image of the door because the world we're in right now, in thinking of economics and business, has always been this room which is very controlled and very predictable. But these natural worlds are highly unpredictable, and walking through that door to understand what's on the other side has always been a key for how you create these types of communities. So anyways, it's a pleasure to be here.
That's wonderful, absolutely. Yeah. I'm really very amazed to hear such a different perspective to the whole thing. And while I have a economics background, I also have a background in outsourcing. Okay. So I am very impressed to understand that there's a lot to do with the global scenario when it comes to economics, and particularly what you said about seek fairness and not advantage. So something that really hit us, because invariably it's believed that business is profit maximization. Mm-hmm. It completely breaks down the whole fundamental principle of business as being profit maximization. Here we're talking about something like the Pareto optimality, where we're talking about optimum happiness for everybody. Mm-hmm. So what you said about the rules of the rainforest is something I think we should all blow up and put up all over the place so we can get ahead with this.
It's interesting. The same principles that apply for profit maximization for large companies, they don't work if you apply them purely at the level of innovation, because innovation requires a form of self-taxation in order for the system to thrive.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because people, I think, have made the mistake for so long of taking the principles of profit maximization and thinking it applied across the whole the whole innovation process, but it doesn't work that way.
And the fundamental difference between the micro perspective and the macro perspective
Absolutely.
comes into the whole scenario. In fact, I think there is a huge global debate going on about whether outsourcing from the cheapest country is a good thing. Is it on? Is it something good that's happening? So there's a lot of debate going on from the economics perspective about outsourcing. And a lot of this, I think, boils down to what you're saying, that ultimately, if the Silicon Valley is a success, it's largely because of these fundamental, very strong human values that are there at the end of it.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a very, very interesting thing. And in fact, I'm very intrigued to ask you, what is your finding about Gujarat? What is your the first take on it? In fact, Dr. Adi, I think really happy to hear from you.
A good way to explain it is that in the venture studio, which we started in October, and we had students from several local schools together, and we had a total of 4 new ventures. That in a period of 6 months, young people between the ages of 18 and 25 had created new ventures that have the potential to be global. 2 of those companies have been funded, and so there's so much raw talent here, and in fact, so we're quite impressed at what is there. And I think the key thing was when Victor shared the diagram with everybody in cubicles, that right here in Gujarat, there's the management school, IIMA, there's the design school, there's IIT Gandhinagar, but they don't talk to each other. So what we've done in the venture studio is to bring them all together, and once they are talking to each other and sharing the information, it's almost like a chemical reaction, an explosion occurs. And we're quite pleased with that the youth of Gujarat are really very collaborative, and once we begin to use some of these rules, they're able to chart a new ground for the reemergence of Gujarat in the world stage. In fact, one of the companies did win the best in Asia just about 2 months ago, best startup company. So the talent is there, the mindset of entrepreneurship is there. But for technology entrepreneurship, it requires a massive amount of collaboration with people that are very dissimilar to you. So in our center, by bringing these people together and helping facilitate that process, it's been very impressive.
In fact, I must mention to you that one of the major focuses of the Knowledge Consortium of Gujarat is to provide that kind of a platform where we can allow knowledge dissemination. And this is an open platform where the logo or our mission statement is a Sanskrit shloka which says Ano Bhadraha Krutavo Yantu Vishwataha, which means let noble thoughts come to us from all directions of the world. This is a very ancient phrase, and I think what you've just mentioned about IIT, IIM and NID is a very classic example of how sometimes we function in silos and how we need to break those walls.
Yes.
So now coming to the practical aspects of how this really works, talking about this at the theoretical level is one thing, but if you have to actually cultivate it, is that possible? Because the Silicon Valley was something that came up at a time when the world was going through a transformation. There was a technology, a sudden boom, an outburst, and a lot of things happened which were conducive to the growth of the Silicon Valley. That was in the 80s and something between the 80s and 2000. So the whole thing happened, and a lot of Indians, in fact, reside there. And now coming to the practical aspects of it, is it possible to create an atmosphere which is conducive to this kind of a situation?
I would say all the pieces are there, and what you shared is something that in most of the world, they also tend to separate knowledge and capital.
That's right.
And technology requires both. So that's one thing. But the knowledge is also, a very important part. It's not just knowledge of the subject, it's also knowledge of the self. So within at the venture studio, we make sure people understand themselves very well.
Wonderful.
We promote failure. Most people don't like to fail. But if you want to build a venture into tomorrow, You have to be ready to fail.
Oh, that's interesting.
But you learn from your failure, and that allows you to be stronger. And so the knowledge of the self becomes a very important thing. In fact, every morning we begin by reflection, self-reflection, so that you are able to have a clear thought by being yourself. And we're all different, and it's that diversity that we recombine. So I think this transformation of knowledge into capital, or knowledge into capital and back again, it's a cycle, it's a virtuous cycle that could be expanded. And I think, so practically what we've done, which is very quite aligned with some of the things Victor has done, practically, if we have people who are ready to become self-aware, if we have capital which is ready to facilitate, and if we have network of other entrepreneurs who've gone and can open the way for the young people, there's just a great possibility to create much larger enterprises within Gujarat, within Ahmedabad. And so we're quite pleased. You mentioned one very key point, because being an economist, micro and macro. One of the debates has been that, in fact, if we apply macroeconomics to just Gujarat state or Ahmedabad, it's small enough that we can see the economics play out. But if we use the same economics for the whole of India, it's too heterogeneous that we will not be able to really change things. So we will tend to apply macro, but to a smaller area, which will be the state of Gujarat and Ahmedabad. And there we can be able to really accelerate development.
Yeah, I think this.
say something,
Yeah, to that point, I think it's interesting. If you look at how people learn culture, and we all learn culture, right? Children learn it, and we even learn it even when we're not children anymore. And you learn it through observing the behaviors of others. And you learn it through school. You learn it. It's taught to you. So we teach people civics, right? We teach these things, and so it's not like culture is not learnable. It's not like a static thing. And this is one of the great powerful traits of the human race, is that we have the ability to adapt our culture to the environment. And what's interesting now is we now have some insight into what types of culture generate high levels of new economic value creation. So can we as a human race actually start to adapt to this culture? And most culture is learned through modeling, right? And whether it's from peers